When Boris Karloff was asked about playing his most famous role of Frankenstein's monster, he said, "My dear old monster, I owe everything to him. He's my best friend." This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
Hi, I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is a No Fear Cast, a podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is the third episode in season 3, and we are working our way towards Halloween. Yay! It's great. We got fall coming, even though it's still like 97 degrees where I am. I want to be eating chili and, drinking hot beverages and whatnot, and it's just, I'm thwarted at every turn.
I know, it's horrible because, yes, as we record this, it's the end of September. And we are literally looking at October on the calendar. And yeah, you're right. It was in the 90s today here. And I'm pretty sure we were close to 90% humidity. I'm not entirely sure on that, but we were close. And all I want is a sweater and leaves on a tree that aren't green. And yeah, chili or soup would be nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A jacket.
Yeah. It feels like, because I want to watch some really good horror, on the movie screen, on my television, somewhere, but it's hard for me to get in the mood for it right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, ironically, lately, I have been watching, even before we talked about doing this particular episode, I was watching some of the old Universal monster movies because I actually, over the summer, I purchased the collection of all of them. So, like, all the Dracula movies, all the Frankenstein movies, all the Invisible Man movies, whatever. And of course, I have not watched them all yet, but I was thinking, like, September and into October, I would watch several of them to kind of get in the mood. And then we ended up talking about horror franchises and series, which we talked about the 13 top grossing ones in our last main episode. And then Lisa and I did a wonderful Patreon episode, an episode for our patrons, just a little advertisement for that. Our patrons for $5 a month get extra bonus episodes where we talk about stuff that didn't make it into the episode or we expand a little bit. And so Lisa wanted to talk about The Purge. So she got all her feelings about The Purge out in our mini episode. While I, put in some interrogatives every now and then and made jokes. We verged on a normal episode length because we got really into it.
It's not so much that I wanted to talk about The Purge, it's that I needed to talk about The Purge.
You had to purge it from your system, so to speak.
Did. Those movies made me angry, and I had the need to purge myself of those feelings after I watched those movies. But
yeah, we got to talking about that kind of stuff, and we were like, so where did this come from? Like this tendency to just keep milking these ideas or throwing these characters out or creating, we talked about the Conjuring universe, like a universe where you can go into different pockets of it and see different things and put characters together and have spin-off movies. And we were like, the original, 1930s through 50s Universal horror movies is a perfect example of this. And, they tried to do a dark universe, Universal movie, monster movie reboot with the recent Mummy, which I think we mentioned at some point. But we thought it might be cool to do an episode where we talk a bit about those old movies, those classics, and I'm sure a lot of you out there have watched, or at least if you haven't, you're familiar with them. Starting with, I think, the 1925 Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney, all the way down to the Abbott and Costello ones where they would meet all the monsters. And along in there in the 40s, there were several movies where they were all crossing over with each other and appearing in the same movie together, and really interesting stuff like that. So I don't know, Lisa, should we approach this because we found an article about the 15 fun facts about these monster movies. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of our favorite facts from that article to get us started?
Yeah, and I do think this is really interesting because as you mentioned, Mel, when we were talking about just horror movie franchises, and we were talking through what some of the things that's needed for these movie franchises to continue on for so long. And we talked about how, you really needed some sort of creative scenario, or an expanded universe where you could follow different characters, or in this case different monsters. But it didn't really occur to me because, yes, horror is known, at least I think popular horror is known for franchises that just kind of keep going on and on and on. But when I think about shared universes, I tend to think more of like superhero movies. I tend to think more of like the Marvel movies, or things like that. And it's funny because we have talked before about the Universal monsters a bit, especially with the new Mummy that came out recently. But it's funny to think that really this idea of a shared cinematic universe really did start with horror and with these Universal monsters, because I guess just in my brain and in popular culture, I tend to think of those as being superhero movies. But anyway, I will tell you, so we mentioned the Mummy, and of course, I guess the original Mummy was in 1932. So one of my favorite facts reading about this is that apparently the writer of that movie, John Lloyd Balderston, was a correspondent who was at the opening of, and I'm going to butcher the name because I know I've heard it before, Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. And so apparently the film was going to be about like an ancient magician. And then after he saw this opening of this tomb, it got changed to a mummy. And now we have kind of the famous mummy that is still out there. I don't know. I like that connection to history. That was pretty interesting.
That is pretty cool. I also find the Mummy fascinating and amusing because that's the one, right, where it starts with the guy who's driven mad, but the only way you know is that he's laughing hysterically, right? And then it like cuts to like, I don't even know, like weeks or months later, and they're just like, this guy's still laughing. So, I've noticed in my rewatching of some of these movies that laughter is not a good thing in the monster movies. It usually means that something really terrible has happened to you.
Well, and
or is about to happen.
All of these old horror movies, you're exactly right. Because as soon as you said that, the first thing that popped into my head was Mr. Sardonicus.
Yes. Which I watched that after you had talked about it, and that is such an interesting movie.
Interesting is one word for it. I love that movie. I will watch it any chance I get. But
it is so creepy.
It's not one that's on a whole lot, which kind of makes me sad. But that's the very typical, like, you've got the really over the top makeup, and it's kind of for our listeners who've never seen Mr. Sardonicus. It's about a man who's horribly disfigured into where his face is always smiling, and it's just as creepy as you would imagine. But that seems to be the point where you realize like how evil, and not just evil but like insane the person is because you see the smile and the constant laughing.
Yeah, which I think is a perfect transition to one of my favorite facts in this article. And this article is from Bloody Disgusting, if you're interested in checking it out online with us. The Invisible Man effect. Again, The Invisible Man, which I watched about a month and a half ago or so. And I've watched The Return of the Invisible Man with Vincent Price. Claude Rains was the first Invisible Man, then Vincent Price. And then there's a movie I watched a couple nights ago, Invisible Agent, which is just, it's intriguing. It's more of a comedy, I guess, where the grandson, the Invisible Man, becomes invisible to go steal secrets from Germany. And it's interesting. I would say watch it because of what it does with the woman character, because she is like a super spy and can like fight and protect herself and solve mysteries, and she flies a plane at the end, and in a lot of ways she's way better at spy stuff than the Invisible Man, who basically messes up her mission and ruins everything because he doesn't know what he's doing. But in the original Invisible Man, I mean, this is a movie that's like 1933, right? And you have these special effects, which I know, listeners, that there are strings on some of the things when he's supposed to be holding it. But there's these, if you look at stills or pictures of when he's dressed up in that black coat and his head is gone, I'm thinking, this is 1933. Like, how did they do this, And so one of the facts talks about how they did it. So basically, I don't even know if I can explain it properly, but when they knew they had to have his hands or his head gone, appear like it was disappearing, they would have him wear this black velvet suit, and he would act on a completely black velvet set, so that then they could then kind of combine. Was it with the matte painting and the black velvet background and the negative, they could then use to kind of like make his face go away, which seems so complicated to me. Also, the scenes where he was supposed to be with the other actors were just shot like without him there, and so they're literally just kind of acting as if something there that's not, while he's meanwhile almost in like this weird early green screen situation, by using this what they call the trick negative. And this is like, I can't even remember what the numbers were, but like the mummy blacking out the eyes trick. I mean, you've got tons of frames of material that you've got to be um, doing the special effect on. So I just thought that was really interesting. I mean, obviously we're further along now than that in our effects, but that kind of like early green screen type way of doing it. I don't know. It's almost better than the later Invisible Man movies. The later Invisible Man movies, you kind of almost like see the person there. So I feel a little bit like a ghost of the person. I feel like this Black Velvet method was probably the most seamless one they could have done.
You know, this may be getting off topic a little bit, but that's really that's a fascinating way of thinking about these movies, is looking at them from a special effects point of view, because I have wondered if sometimes our, I guess, more advanced cameras and more advanced special effects haven't hurt horror in a lot of ways. Because there's some, and that's not to say that there aren't really great ones. Like, for instance, I saw the movie Hereditary. Which one is it?
Oh, I think it's Hereditary.
Yes, Hereditary. Okay. I don't know why. There's just, there's just that moment of questioning. Did I get that name right? Anyway, I saw that movie and I was blown away by it, and I liked it. And I mean, I could get nitpicky about it like I could with any movie, but I really enjoyed it. And that seemed to be one of those movies where the special effects, I mean, they were incredible and they looked wonderful on screen. And I saw it on the big screen, and having the wide lens and being able to, for instance, see like entire rooms at once really played well to what they were doing with that movie. And so that really struck me as a movie that was written for what we can do with special effects. And I applaud it for it because it was fantastic. And but what I like about movies like the classic Universal movies is, even though the makeup and the special effects seem kind of simplistic compared to what we have now, there's something about watching them, and especially seeing like the graininess of the quality of the film lends to a kind of I'm searching for the right word here, and I'm not finding it, but like sort of an uncanny valley aspect to these movies when you're looking at the creatures. I mean, certainly with the Invisible Man, like you're talking about, that I think newer movies are missing. And I don't know if that uncanny is really the right word I'm searching for here, but yeah, you know, yeah, that
Yeah, I think Uncanny would be right, especially with the Invisible Man, because I mean, you've got those moments that they play up the special effects when he's taking the wrapping off of his head, and he's got like no eyes, and you see the back of the wrap. Like it looks like it's a person, but there's nothing
right,
inside, which is really terrifying without even doing that much.
right.
Yeah, there's a simplicity. Well, I don't know. It's not like what they were doing was simple, but like there's a cleanness to it, maybe, or like a purity to the effects. They don't go overboard, they're just trying to achieve that unsettling aspect.
That may be it. Is that it's clean, maybe a better word than simple. Because like I'm looking at a picture right now of the Mummy, and it's terrifying. And when you're looking at it, I don't know that there is this kind of decayed, diseased look to it. But I think if we could see too clearly, it would lose that. And I think this was one of the downfalls of, and I will confess, I did not see the newest Tom Cruise, The Mummy movie. I just saw clips of it, and that was enough for me. But there was this weird, like, glossiness to it. Everything was too polished, was too perfect, it was missing the grittiness to it, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. I think it does. I mean, I think that's why movies like Mr. Sardonicus can still work today too, because it's not so much about the effects and how slick you can make it. It's about the actual, like, the fear aspect, I guess, is a better way of putting it. Like they're really playing on the kind of creepy, unknown, uncanny, unsettling fear that's more like a prickle on the back of your neck. Again, the Invisible Man, the fear, it comes from when he's invisible, he gets this complex and he loses his mind. He goes mad. He laughs all the time, as you do. But he's like, I'm unbeatable. No one can see me. I can murder people. I can do whatever. And like, we don't have like super over the top special effects. There isn't that glossiness that you were talking about, but it's still like, oh man, if somebody could be invisible, like this is just disturbing on so many levels. And it doesn't even have to like have the sharp effects that we're used to now. It's that kind of facing that weirdness head on. And then, like, I know nowadays they can be kind of laughable, but when you really think about it, like how disturbing it can be that someone can think, I can have the power of God and create whoever I want, or the creepy kind of Bela Lugosi Dracula, or somebody being invisible, or those sorts of things. I feel like there's a kind of like a human fear in there that they were able to play with better in with the materials that they had than, say, like computer special effects.
I completely agree. And just kind of going back to talking about those special effects, um, I was reading here that because when you talk about the Universal monsters, I mean, of course, let's see, there was Dracula and all the movies that went along with that, and of course Frankenstein and the ones that followed that, and the Mummy, which we've mentioned, the Invisible Man, Wolfman, which we haven't mentioned yet. But when I think about the Universal monsters, probably the one that is the most iconic to me is Frankenstein's monster, and Boris Karloff's portrayal of that creature and that character. And I mean, he's so iconic that when you think about that character, that's usually who people imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of blocky head, green skinned, bolts in the neck, you know, it's which is so far from what Mary Shelley described in her book. And so this is one of these, I mean, just from a literature standpoint, this is fascinating to me because it's a case of when the adaptation kind of overtook the original, material for a while, at least in public mind. But when you look at what they did, so when they were doing it, they worked on him. They said it took 8 hours to do his makeup, and they would start at 11 a.m. and finish at 7 p.m. and then they'd pick up shooting from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. and then it would take another 2 hours just to get the makeup off. So you're talking about a day that went from 11 a.m. to 4 a.m. the next morning. But that was for, I think, when they were working on what they had learned with the mummy. But for Frankenstein, they said it took 4 hours, but it had to be done every single day, and as opposed to like the mummy, because I guess they wouldn't film every day because they couldn't. It was physically impossible. But this is what I think is so interesting. So the Wolfman took 6 hours, and they would use rubber prosthetics for his makeup. And they would use yak hairs that they would apply kind of, single and in clumps, but very slowly onto this, just to get like this right kind of Wolfman look. And I would love to know the process that they went through to just in creating these makeup looks, because so much of it was done with like makeup and prosthetics, and they created looks that we're still working with today. I mean, anytime we, like I said, anytime we talk about Frankenstein, the novel, that's usually what people picture. I mean, even Dracula, just the whole idea of the slicked back hair and the cape, just a costuming choice that now that goes with that character. And the Wolfman, I mean, I like werewolf books. I've read a lot of werewolf books, but usually when you talk about like a werewolf, that's probably the first image is the image of the Wolfman is what pops into my head. And I would love to do more research into that, just knowing what they did with the makeup alone, because to me that's like borderline genius level stuff.
Oh yeah, and what was it? The Frankenstein costume was like over 50 pounds that he had to carry. Frankenstein's monster costume. That he has to carry around with him too. I mean, you're like hot and covered in makeup, and then you're carrying around 50 pounds worth of costuming.
And they would go for like 12, 14-hour days if they could. I mean, when they were filming. Yeah.
Which kind of reminds me of one of my favorite Universal monsters, the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yes, I knew I was leaving one off of my list. I was trying to run through my brain, and I was like, I'm leaving one off.
But his costume, so I might be mispronouncing his first name, I'm not sure. Rico Browning. His costume, of course, he's like this creature costume, so I guess it's similar to kind of like early Godzilla costumes in a way. So he was overheated practically, instantly, and then apparently he couldn't sit down for his entire 14-hour workday unless he went through the whole rigmarole of getting the thing off. And then he said he basically, throughout the entire making of this movie, he could barely see what was around him. He didn't have any goggles or anything, he said at one point, and the eyes of the suit were like an inch from his eye. So he said it was like, quote, looking through a keyhole with blurred vision. And so I'm just imagining him like carrying the woman around and coming up out of the water, and like literally he has no idea what's around him.
Well, he actually said that, carrying her around those scenes, like he did knock her head on those fake rocks because he could not see where he was walking.
Which is probably the scariest part of that, getting your head banged on the rocks.
I know.
A monster who can't see anything.
Oh my gosh. At least they were fake rocks. I mean,
But
it might
that's
have been a
true.
very different story that he was telling had they been in a real cave. Yeah. Oh, I love the creature from the Black Lagoon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, that's another one that again so iconic when you look at what's that movie that just came out not too long ago, The Shape of
Yeah, the
Water.
Shape of Water, yeah.
Right. I mean, watching that and you look at the costuming and the makeup in that movie, and it's a direct descendant from Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Mm.
Yeah, I wish I could find another word than iconic because I feel like I'm going to say that a lot during this episode.
Well, and I also thought it was interesting that it was Son of Dracula was the first time anyone turned into a bat when they used the special effects. So like before in Dracula, and then I guess it was there was another movie after that, and then Son of Dracula, or maybe Son of Dracula was the even later. There would be like they were Bela Lugosi was supposed to be turning into a bat, right? But he would never be like on the same screen. It wasn't him actually turning into it. It was Son of Dracula, and it was the dude John Fulton who did the Black Velvet screen trick thing on Invisible Man that did the bat transformation. So yeah, it wasn't in the first two movies, but it was in that third movie. And I was actually watching a trailer for House of Dracula earlier today, which was the movie where they got a bunch of the monsters together. They had like a crossover thing. And in the trailer, it shows, I guess it would have been John Carradine in that movie, turning into the bat. And it was actually a pretty nifty special effect. I mean, it happened super quick. I don't know how they did it, but, for a movie of that time period, it worked really well. It was pretty slick.
Yeah, House of Dracula was really, I mean, they had done crossover movies. I guess prior to that, they had, for instance, Frankenstein meets Wolfman in 43. And movies like that. And of course, all of these movies spawned numerous sequels. They liked family member movies, I noticed. Son of Dracula, Son of Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein. But House of Dracula was one of these that it was really the shared universe because it was these the studio's attempt, I mean, really just to make as much money as they could, but they put every monster they could think of in there. Frankenstein's monster, a vampire, a werewolf. Yeah,
And they even they even lifted footage from other Frankenstein movies. So you have Glenn Strange playing Frankenstein's monster in House of Dracula, but you also have footage of Lon Chaney Jr. from Ghost of Frankenstein, Boris Karloff from Bride of Frankenstein. Yeah, so that's pretty cool too. Is that you not only got the monsters coming together, Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein, and even a Mad Doctor. Frankenstein's monster and the Mad Doctor, but you also have like three of the iconic people who played the Frankenstein monster.
Yeah, I didn't. I've actually never seen House of Dracula. I kind of want to. It sounds nutty.
I haven't either. Maybe we should watch it and do an episode on it.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I don't know, Mel, if you've listened to this or if any of our listeners has, but if this kind of universal monster, Boris Karloff, Lon Chaney, is at all interesting to you, there was a podcast, and I may have mentioned this when we talked about it before, but You Must Remember This did a pretty good series on it, talking about just. It was more focused on the actors and their lives as this was going on, and it's very interesting, and it gives a really good insight into, I think, the man behind the mask, kind of.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, but it made me think about it because I was thinking about Lon Chaney Jr. specifically, and you know, of course, there was his father who was equally as famous, the man with 1,000 faces.
Mhm. Oh yeah, the Great Phantom.
um, but yeah, there's some there that's a really good if you're looking for some extra information about that. But these crossovers get kind of fun. Um,
Yeah, apparently in House of Dracula, the monsters want this mad scientist to cure them of their monstrosity, but it's just like chaos ensues.
well, I mean, yeah.
What else could happen, really?
um, I mean, I'm imagining like just this epic battle between all three of them, but apparently that never happens. So
Maybe it's new ground.
they don't need it. Yeah, I don't think we need to be giving uh, the Universal monsters another spin. But you know that's kind of we've mentioned it, but talking about the new one because they had done the Mummy and there were plans to do the Wolfman, right? Did they ever make the Wolfman?
I don't. I'm not sure. And there were also plans for Johnny Depp to be the Invisible Man at some point, but I
That's
don't know that
right.
that ever happened.
Last I had heard, I think they had cast the Wolfman, but then they may have pulled the plug when the Mummy did not turn out the way they wanted to.
Okay.
But I wonder, just kind of looking back at all this, I mean, part of me wonders if they should have even attempted it in the first place. Just because I think audiences still associate those characters with these original movies. And you know, I'm not one of these who gets mad about remakes or reboots because my theory is if you love something, I mean, you might as well, you know, try to reimagine it a little bit. That's what I love about like the theater, for instance, is you can go see a play and it can be the same play you've seen before, but because it's put on by different actors or there's a different director, there might be a slightly different spin on it, and it doesn't lose any of its luster for me. So I don't see why you couldn't do that in film as well, but I do think they missed the boat a little bit because it seems like with the Tom Cruise movie especially that they just took the basic notion, like the one sentence summary, and ran with it rather than trying to really analyze what people loved about the original and attempting to keep that.
Yeah, I agree. And I was actually looking it up while you were talking just to be sure. Apparently, there were three movies that they thought would like be the connector between Brendan Fraser's The Mummy um, trilogy, I guess that was, and then what they wanted to do with bringing the monsters back. So there was a movie Van Helsing, Wolfman, apparently starring Benicio del Toro, and then a movie Dracula Untold, which I'd never even heard of Dracula Untold. Apparently they were all flops, um, but they went ahead and did the new Mummy anyway.
Oh, you know, I
But I don't
saw
think I saw any of those three.
portions of Dracula Untold, but I don't think I realized that that was intended to be connected to the new what are they calling it? They were calling it something Dark
The
Universe.
Dark Universe.
Yeah.
According to the Sci-Fi Wire article, the intention was that Dracula Untold would kind of be an Iron Man, like to get the way they're going to get all the monsters together, basically. Because apparently, according to this article, they try like a weird like shield for monsters where Jekyll Hyde like runs this group of monsters people who like fight monster people. I don't understand it. I guess I shouldn't judge something I haven't seen, but it sounds kind of like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but not good.
Ah, yeah, that does sound kind of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen-ish. um,
Hmm.
yeah, Dracula Untold. That's another one that I caught portions of it, but I've never seen the whole thing, and I honestly wasn't interested in seeing the whole thing. But I know it was supposed to look at the beginnings of Dracula, so it was supposed to show how like Dracula became Dracula. So it was like an origin story. But and while I thought it was kind of interesting in that I know, especially after talking to Dacre Stoker about the writing of Dracula, and we learned that kind of back in Romania and that area that Dracula is still considered a bit of a folk hero. So I think it was kind of trying to take that aspect of it and look at how he could have been a good person, and I guess he took on the monstrosity to save his people, that type of story. Which intellectually I kind of find interesting, but from the standpoint of a moviegoer, I really didn't want to see that. That's not the appeal of a vampire to me. I like my vampires to be nasty monsters, and I don't need them to be anything else. um, so yeah, I think that was kind of a good example of that, just kind of flopping a little bit because they did turn him in. I guess they were trying really hard to turn him into kind of the dark Captain America. I mean, like
Yeah, that seems to be like they wanted a Marvel or DC universe type thing to play with, but they don't. I mean, one of the things the writer of this article says, which I kind of agree with, is that they're not building the audience for it. And so like apparently you just jump right into the Mummy, whereas the original Universal monsters, they each had their own kind of movie to get you used to them. And then you had like a sequel, and then all of a sudden they were all playing together in this universe. And it seems like they're just like, well, we made Van Helsing, the Wolfman, and Dracula Untold, whether you saw it or not. So now it should make perfect sense why this is happening. And it's like, well, it's been like 14 years or something, right, since the first one. So, um, no, you maybe need some more, a little bit less flashy effects, maybe a smaller budget, and more story and build up. Maybe then people would be more invested.
well, yeah, and if you're gonna compare it to a comic book shared universe, I mean, yes, the audience knows these characters from pop culture, but when you look at like a Spider-Man, a Batman, Superman, um, those have the comic books, and so you have the comic readers who are really invested in the storylines and who know the storylines, and but they still build the individual movies, carefully crafting the backstories. And I think that's part of the reason that those have been more successful. Like you said, they've kind of primed the audience, and even with the original Universal monsters. Yeah, I mean, we got, I want to say 5 Frankenstein movies before Frankenstein ever even crossed over into anybody else's movie.
Hmm.
And they were all connected stylistically too, which I don't know if we could even pinpoint. Like you mentioned Dracula Untold, and I had never connected it to the Mummy. Even stylistically, I didn't see a connection.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. I think that's a really good point in that they did not prime the audience the way they should have, because they could have done that. Where I mean, we essentially could have had a Marvel shared universe, but just with monsters. Had they taken their time.
Yeah, though I have to admit, as a person who's always kind of like the classic monster movies, I'll always be partial to that. And I don't know if it's just because I'm not saying you're ruining my childhood or that kind of thing. If it was compelling, I might go see it. But I kind of feel like, oh, I like the original. Like, I'm not sure that you can take what was already done and cram it into the kind of like you were saying, like superhero comic book kind of take, you know? But maybe someone could. Maybe someone, like Guillermo del Toro or something, like could do something interesting and new. I don't know.
Yeah, but that goes back to knowing your audience too. I mean, it really does. It goes back to understanding what your audience loves about these movies. Um, and I mean, again, I'm not saying like The Shape of Water was a remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon, but like in my head, it kind of is.
I could see
And
that. There's definitely some sort of line of influence there.
yeah, I mean, I guess I see it, and I would love to see more of the monsters reimagined in that sort of way. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine a Wolfman, that was given that kind of care and
Complexity.
complexity and imbued with that kind of humanity? Like, I'd love to see that. But we didn't get that. um, yeah. There's always a danger. I mean, because Universal did that too. I mean, let's face it, some of those movies were just downright wacky.
Oh yeah, by the
Um,
time you get to Abbott and Costello, it's kind of like, oh,
yeah,
how
it's
many can you do? And which is funny because apparently they tried to quit. In after 1936, they were like, no more monster movies for us. And then apparently, a theater in Los Angeles in around 38 or so was struggling to stay in business and decided they were going to do a features, like a triple run of Dracula, Frankenstein, and Son of Kong. And folks were so pumped about it and like lined up around the movie theater waiting on tickets that Universal was like, maybe we should get back into this monster stuff. But yeah, then it's just like, oh yeah, we need a sixth Dracula movie.
of
Yeah, we need
course.
Frankenstein's monster to meet Abbott and Costello. Of course.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, yeah, when it comes down to it, money is going to be the driving force. Of course it is. And that was the driving force for keeping the actors going,
Mhm.
continuing to play these roles because I think, all of them at some point expressed disdain, for this being the role that, their kind of role of a lifetime. But um and of course, I mean, the studio is going to keep making movies as long. I mean, we see that with the superhero movies. Like, they're going to continue making movies until we like riot practically, until we say stop showing us these. We're not giving you any more of our money.
Yeah, as long
Um,
as people go and pay for a ticket, it'll keep coming.
exactly. But I do think that to be successful, you have to know what your audience wants and what they expect. I mean, Star Wars, that's a prime example of that. Um, of knowing what your fandom wants and being able to deliver it in order to
Mhm.
continue to make movies
Or not
or
there for a
not.
little bit.
Yeah,
But
again. Maybe not paying attention to what people want.
I just love this is changing the subject a little bit, but I love the fact from that the bloody disgusting article we were talking about where it talks about how the mummy movies take place in the future. I had never really paid attention to that or thought about it, but apparently it's like was it the original mummy was supposedly happening in 1921. Then the next one is 10 years later in 31. Then the next one is in 1940, and then the next one it's like 30 years have passed. So in the last two movies, if you do the math, apparently one you're in 1970 and the last one you're supposed to be in like the 1990s. But everything still looks the same and they're all still talking about World War II happening at the time.
I mean, because clearly World War II was going to go on for that long.
Forever and ever. But I guess if they had changed it and tried to be like sci-fi or whatever they like thought was going to happen in the 90s, it would have messed up the Mummy vibe. But it is kind of funny. Like I'm looking at the still that they provide, and I'm like, that basically looks like a 1940s movie, and supposedly they're in 1997. So
I had not picked up on that.
I hadn't either. I mean, I had never really paid attention. This article kind of brought that to my attention. I'm just thinking of all the things that happened in 1997 happening while these guys from 1940 are standing on that porch.
Yeah. Well,
Which is another thing, I guess the Universal monster movies were so timeless in a way. You know, like they could have been happening at any point when the original book came out or World War II or whatever. It was just kind of like a given. Um, and I guess maybe we didn't have DVDs at the time, right? So people were only going to see them in the theater. So I guess, continuity and historicism probably was not upmost on their minds.
yeah, I think I even read in there that at one point in one of the movies they messed up like the name of the town. And so they were saying it one way in the first movie, and then in the second movie they had completely, changed it. Or not completely changed it, but changed it enough that it was a big boo-boo, but apparently nobody noticed. But yeah, you're right. That's just one of the benefits of not having, streaming movies, DVDs, and everything else.
Yeah, you're not watching them back to back and being like, why is Bob now named Jack? It's like.
and by the time, well before you get to like, something like Abbott and Costello meet all the monsters, before you even get to that kind of level of silliness. I don't think they were worried about continuity at that point. They, they were just going to make these movies. And, I'm glad they did.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it'd be really hard. I mean, I'm not saying there wouldn't be any. I mean, obviously there'd still be supernatural and horror stuff going on in the world. We can go back. We've talked in the podcast about how far back you can go for that. But I feel like the Universal Monsters was kind of this moment in horror literature and cinema where it was kind of like a turning point. And there's a lot of stuff that we probably wouldn't have today that they helped with, from makeup to special effects to the themes to how to reinvent monsters and fears. I mean, there's still tons of werewolf stories out there, and they all probably have some indebtedness to Wolfman, So it's interesting.
It is. Yeah. And with that, I think this is a good place for us to kind of wrap things up and thank our listeners for sticking with us this long into this episode. And I have to admit, Mel, just talking about this and kind of reminiscing about some of these movies makes me a little bit more in the holiday spirit.
There we go.
I'm still angry that it's 90 degrees outside.
Me too. Maybe we'll get a cold front soon.
Maybe. I debated getting a pumpkin out the other day to put on my front porch and make it look all fallish, and then I thought, no, it would rot in 2 days.
Yeah, I couldn't even walk outside to put the pumpkin out because I would be bitten up by mosquitoes. I have to stay inside. But I could look outside at a pumpkin, I guess.
At least we can watch, Creature from the Black Lagoon and Wolfman,
yes.
and feel a little bit more like it's Halloween, or at least approaching Halloween. So anyway, thank you, listeners, for staying with us, and we are going to continue our discussion of kind of popular movie franchises. And if you've been paying attention at all, you'll know that we're creeping ever closer to not only Halloween the holiday, but Halloween the movie franchise as well. So stay tuned for that, and we will talk to you then.